Hello everyone, in today's video we're going to finish up our series on this Airbus A320neo here. This is not the fancy working title, this is the one that comes out of the box for those of you looking for that experience. So today what we're going to be doing is we're going to put this thing down on the ground, which is easier said than done, because you're going to have some fun with the auto land there, or the lack thereof in this particular version, but hey, we'll make it do with what we can. Let's get started. So right now we're arriving on the Stella 1 star into Bradley International Airport. Bradley is way over yonder, kind of a thing like that. So there's a couple different things we're going to have to do to get our plane ready for our landing. First things first, since we are under our lucky altitude of 10,000, it's a good time to go ahead and flip on some lights, which is going to make it a little bit easier for people to see us, especially for operating at night here. Now, right now, what we've done is we've actually selected a specific altitude. We're going to be holding the axis to descend and maintain 4,000 there. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and set our distance at altitude of 4,000. I'm going to actually pull this out to us because what we want to do here is we want this to be a selected altitude. So what's going to happen now is that we're going to continue our descent down to this, and we're actually going to level off at that point. Now, if we had any doubt as to what altitude we should be coming down to, if we roll our heads down here right now, you can see that my currently selected altitude is going to be 4,000 real quick. And now the reason we know that that's working is because if you look, we're in an open descent, which is basically whatever we set our throttle to. Think of it as flight level change, by the way. And we're going to head down to this particular one before we can continue our approach. Now, there's a couple of things we need to do on our approach. We're going to be using the ILS for runway 24 today. And one thing you notice probably is coming over here is we have this thing that says no DH. That's just a piece of information to give us a heads up saying you never picked your decision height. Was this something that you wanted to do? We're actually going to go up a little bit higher here. We'll give this a quick little tug. And again, that should set us to about 5,000. Perfect. And of course, if we wanted to, we could dial in a specific speed as well. If, for example, you'll see right now that 250 knots is selected. If we were to actually come down here to our display and we come down here and hit the, the performance button, under descent, you see our managed speed is 249. So that's exactly what that's going to be. And you can see it's basically 249. If we wanted to be lazy, we could click this button and go, and now we're doing exactly 250 knots. If we wanted the FMS to control this, we could just like that, and it'll go back to that manage mode, which is why we have that little light right there. All right, so we need to get ready for our landing here. So we're going to be using ILS 24. If you did not pre-program this into the FMS ages ago, this is a good time to press the flight plan button, click on your destination button next to it, go to the arrival page, and then select the appropriate information you want. So for us, we're coming in at ILS runway 24 here. I pre-selected this one, and we have no transition. You can see right now we're on the Stella 1 down to our way. I think we're going to be hitting Kibby. Now, if we wanted to, if you go back to the flight plan page and you actually start surfing, you can see the different places we're coming through. You can see Stella is going to be that initial spot. You can see we hit Molds, Searle, and then it's going to be Motel. So we're actually skipping Kibby here. This is going to be a very sharp turn for us, but no problem. Again, we're going relatively slow here. To zoom out a little bit, you can see very clearly the little whoop-de-doo that we're going to basically be making in order to get ourselves down to the ground. So after that's been set, now we have to make sure our ILS information is set correctly. Now, in the old days, what you do is you come down here and you'd have a little thing, basically, where you could program your ILS. I can actually press this button, but notice nothing happens here because in this particular version of this aircraft, this isn't going to be the one that actually dictates it. Instead, what you have is this little button that says Rad Nav. Now, if you press that real quickly, what you're going to observe is the fact that it has pre-selected our ILS frequency based on the one we selected. We picked ILS 24, and then our frequency is going to be 111.10, which is correct. That's what we want. The other thing you're going to observe is the fact that the course here is 238 degrees, which is exactly what we want it to be. That's going to be basically that component. Now, we have to get ready for our approach here. So what I'm going to do is, you can see we've leveled off at 5,000 feet, which is fine. We want to cross Stella at about 5. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to be heading over to my perf button, which means performance, pressing next phase. Now, this is the tricky part. This is when we can dial into the computer all the details about the ground. Now, for example, if we wanted to, we could come here and dial in the QNH. We have 2981 as Bradley right now. Now, notice what happens when I do this. Dials that in. Temperature, we take a look here. We have our little temperature readout. It's relatively warm outside today. It's at 22 at Bradley, so we'll do 22. And of course, this gives us the ability to dial in any winds that we're aware of at that particular location. The winds today are 210 / our wind is going to be 07. So we're going to punch that in. You can see that dials it in. Our transition altitude's accurate. And we have this thing that says VAP. VAP is our approach speed. This is the speed we need to basically bring our aircraft down to the ground at. The other thing you're going to observe, if you come over here, you have this thing that says MDA and you have DH. This is where you can dial in your minimum decision altitude or your decision height. So for us, our decision height is actually going to be 200 feet. That comes right off of the actual flight plan approach plate itself. Notice we can tell we're turning because something got, yo, wait, what happened? And that's why we're doing this as an instrument approach. So our decision height has now been selected. And if you actually come here, you'll see that this went away. Now, one of the things you have to be very careful here is the difference between a height and an altitude. An altitude is this number, height is actually above the ground. So that's something we'll be mindful of. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to flip on the terrain view. This is going to give us a lovely view of the mountain range that's going to be out here kind of in western Massachusetts, kind of upstate New York. And of course, we're going to snap around this way and we'll get a lovely look at the Pioneer and Connecticut Valley as we're kind of coming around here. See a little bit of yellow on both sides as we kind of finish our approach here. So this is all set and ready to go. Next, what we like to do is we like to go ahead and make sure our auto brake is set. Medium is fine. We're runway 24. We have plenty of runway. Next thing we want to do is we want to confirm and make sure our speed brakes are armed. To arm them, you're just going to pull them out, just like I did right there. And again, you can disengage and re-engage and all that if you need to. But for us, we're pulling it up to basically get it over the little detent so it snaps backwards the moment we touch the ground. It's one less button that we have to push. And if I've learned anything about flying in the real world, it's the less buttons you push, the less chance you're going to make a mistake. So now I get to enjoy this lovely region. There's Route 90 right off my left. If you're wondering why I know that intuitively, is because in my early days of getting my pilot's license myself, one of the things that I used to do is basically fly out to here to Pittsfield, and oh man, you should see how many times I've used that as a waypoint. Oh, I'm sorry, Route 90 is right below me. But man, have I used this one a few times to not get horribly lost. But Pittsfield's over to my left and all that. You can actually look, if you look really, really, really hard here, you got your Agawams and Springfields and everything. Basically off my 12 o'clock as we're dipping into the Pioneer Valley here. So what I'll do now is I'll go ahead and tell the computer that it's okay to descend to our next altitude. So that's going to be 2,500 feet here. If you get, how do I set 2,500? What do I do? All you can do is if you actually come over here, you can click to change your mode. So I can actually come down here to 2,500 and switch it back to this one. And all we're going to do is we can go ahead and give that a little tug, and that's going to tell the computer we want to do an open descent. So what will happen now is our thrust will automatically spool down, and we'll start continuing our descent into our particular position. Now, if we wanted the computer to manage our descent, we could simply come over here and push forward. And you'll notice now that this little light comes on to basically say, hey, we're basically now using the computer's altitude selection, and this is setting as the floor, as opposed to manually dialing, I want to be at this altitude right now. The reason that's so useful is if you go over to your flight plan page, whatever has been programmed here will be preset. You can see actually 2,700 is the correct altitude there, not 2,500, which again is all very, very valuable. But if you make a change, make sure you push that back in again so that it knows you made a change here. So we're going to be setting this as our floor altitude, and you can actually see the little A simply meaning at or above. Now remember a moment ago I was commenting that you'll be able to see the whole Pioneer Valley and the Connecticut Valley? Ta-da! And you can see it very, very clearly as we continue our descent here. You know, we're a little low. A lot of times they hold you at 4,000 until you get to Searle. Like if you look at Searle here, you can see that it holds you at 2,700. But because of the valley and because of these mountains and because of things like this, they usually get you at a lower altitude. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to fast forward to it just in this corner right here. All right, we're getting ourselves lined up. You can see all these lovely airspaces we're violating along the way. So basically what we have now is that we're getting set up for a final approach here. You notice this number suddenly appeared. This is our radar altitude, which you probably recognized. Another thing we want to do is as we're making our way down here is we need to pick a speed that's going to give us a pretty good combination of get there at the same time as give us flexibility. Now, if you take your head down here and you look, you'll notice the fact that we have some limitations here. One thing we have here is our landing gear. We're allowed to extend them at 250 and we have to retract them no faster than 220. But you also notice our flap extension speed is 230, 215, 200, and 185. Now, if you look up here, you'll observe the fact that I set myself to 215. Now, the reason I did that is it's going to allow us to get that first click of flaps and not the second clip. Because remember, if you're at 215 and you get a gust of wind, now you're at 225. That could not be so good for your flat motors. So you want to kind of keep that in the back of your head. But that now means I can go ahead and pop in our first click of flaps there, flaps number 1, and it's not going to have any untoward effects. Basically, all you're doing, by the way, when you hit flaps 1 is you're extending your slats here. So we get a lovely, lovely look. By the way, really cool restaurant right here, if anybody's interested. For the life of me, though, I'm sorry, this is Barnes. The one I was looking for is over. I'm sorry, Westover. Barnes is over on this side. But yeah, I don't know anything about a restaurant there. So as we start to round the corner, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this button that says LS. That simply means ILS display. And you can actually see here that we're starting to see the localizer. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to press the APPR button. So what I've done now is I've armed the approach and I've armed the glide slope. So if you actually look here, you'll take a look and see that we have a glide slope in blue, meaning I'm waiting for it. And you'll see we have a loc in blue, meaning we're waiting for it. And we have our decision height in blue, meaning we're also waiting for it. But observe that the aircraft did not change anything. Now, the other thing we can see here very, very clearly is that we have a CAT2 approach. Basically, we've selected this particular option. It'll actually read this to us as we kind of round the corner here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to drop my speed a little bit. And we're going to get ourselves to a place all the way down to 200 knots here. Actually, 195 is even better because that's going to allow us to get 2 more clips of flaps. Taking a look over here, we can see 1 plus F. We can see it looks pretty good. Taking a look over here, we can go ahead and snap those flaps 2 down once we get a little bit slower here. And again, you can see we're getting some pretty significant gusts. Whoopsies. Oh, there we go. So now we're coming around the corner, and again, getting ourselves pretty well established. One more check of all of our different pressure settings. Oop, that's losing the connection to the weather servers there. And you can see we're hovering at a pretty good speed. I can see the little runway directly off the front of us. Believe it or not, right now, we're not on the ILS. We're still being guided by the computer itself. So one of the things you have to be kind of mindful of, and this is one of the great things about vectors in the real world, is getting us ready to go. So what we're going to do now is we're going to be reducing speed even further. 177 would be the minimum. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down to 158 here. I'm also going to go ahead and slide my landing gear down just like that. And you also can see here that not only is our localizer visible, but you can also see that my glide slope setting is visible as well. Now, as we decelerate, we can go ahead and start pumping in the next set of flaps here. You can go ahead and set to this particular one. And we're going to leave it at this flap setting. Now, you're sitting there going, what? I thought you were going to go to full flaps. Well, not quite. We're actually going to be using flaps 3. If you remember when we were in the performance page, do you see how it says configuration 3 and it says full? This little star here means that we've selected this particular configuration. Now, if I stick my head over there, you can see we're actually in that configuration, which is the one that we're going to be wanting to be on for this particular approach here. That's going to make our life a lot simpler as we start to come down. Now, if you're wondering why you're leaving your speed up so high, you know, this thing says we're supposed to be doing 145. Why are you doing a 158? I should have done 155, by the way. Is because that extra little bit of 10 knots is going to give us a little bit more flexibility as we start to arrive down to the ground. Now, if we take a look over here, we can observe the fact that our glide slope setting, this little big diamond right here, is sliding downward. It's going to intersect with this, meaning we're on glide slope. And you're going to see slowly as the localizer is going to start shifting itself over to this direction. Now, at any point as a pilot, I can just grab the controls from this thing and basically kind of flip us around and kind of get us going. But I'm not going to worry about that too much. What I find super interesting is we're technically on localizer and not glide slope right now. So I find that interesting. See how it switched modes as soon as we cross that? And now the nose of the plane is going to start coming down, and we're actually going to be doing our approach. Now, in the real world, what gets really interesting is they'll do things like keep your speed up, or they'll give you a minimum speed, which is a lot of fun for us because we're an airliner and it takes a long time for us to slow down. So that's kind of one of those little things. It's like, oh, thanks for that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and select my speed. If you remember, our wind was kind of like this kind of oblique wind here. You can actually see here, it's about 204.16. That's about right. So it's kind of crossing us just like this sort of a piece. So we're going to give ourselves a little bit of extra speed on our approach. You can actually see our ground speed is 142. So we're getting blown around pretty hard here, which is not atypical for this time of year. Just kind of something that you're always going to get. All right, so let's give ourselves a little bit of wiggly room here. We don't want to be having a gust to suddenly stop. So we're looking at about 14, again, about 150. We could technically get away with 152 here, and that's going to get us a pretty good speed. And if you look at your ground speed is basically your approach speed, which is exactly what we wanted it to be. So that's almost perfect for us. So now we're pretty much ready to rock. The tricky part here comes in shutting everything down. And that's where it gets a little fun, especially for this aircraft. Now, if you have an autopilot off button, make sure you get your finger on that aggressively, because when they call it, we're going to want to have to bring this down to the ground. Now, this one does not have the auto land like the Boeing does. You actually have to put this thing on the ground on its own. So what makes this really, really challenging is the fact that we have to kind of time everything now. So our flaps are set correctly, our speed brakes are armed, everything is armed. This is good, but one of the things we probably can observe is this is about between 36 and 40% power. The reason that's useful to us is when we switch over to manual control, we know roughly where we're going to have to put our thrust so that we're not going to be fiddling with it at the last part of our actual approach here. So there's our ground down there. It's looking pretty hard. Again, one last check of all of our different settings. Stuff looks good here. Stuff looks good. We're a little above glide slope, which is typical. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to disengage our auto throttle here, and I'm actually going to go ahead and play with it to get us back where it was a few moments ago. Now I can see here we're about 40% or so we're going to level it about there. Now the reason I did that is because when we disengage the automatic pilot, we're not going to be fighting the automatic throttle. We're just going to be able to help to guide it and then pull the automatic throttle back for that last couple feet. Now if you have a button to release auto throttle, you can press that pretty much when you get a little bit closer. But for those of you who do not have that, sometimes it's easier to kind of get it ready to go before you have to kind of do it at the last second there. Again, the more buttons you push, the more likely you are going to make a mistake. So you want to be kind of cautious with that. So there's our lovely big ground. I can see the rabbits are running right up to the edge of the runway there. We do have a crosswind. It's not game over crosswind, but it is substantial. So we're going to enjoy that. I was reading a fun article actually recently where they're describing how bad the weather vane effect is in flight sim. It's bad. It's just a little too much, All right, speed is looking pretty good. We're drifting a little bit. We're waiting for our minimums call.
300.
I'm going to go ahead and pull it off.
200.
All right, let's do it. You can see that the glide slope immediately started to drift. That's okay, though. That's what we're here for. That's where we're the pilots and not the computer.
100,
There's a 100.
60, 50, 40,
Nose up.
20,
Wait.
retard,
And we're down. We're going to let the nose come down nice and gently. We're going to put our thrust in. We're going to hold down the reverser, and we're going to push it all the way forward. And again, now remember, you still have to fly the plane. And that is it. And you can see, especially at that last point, the autopilots definitely need to be tweaked a little bit here. Once we're under 80 knots, by the way, you can go ahead and release the thrust reversers. That usually gets you perfectly comfortable in that. But we're not going to take that turn off there. It's one of the things I learned from my early days is be careful what turn up you select. Also, be careful what turn off you select as well. All right, we'll go ahead and I'll use the manual braking here for the last bit. And we have reached our destination, just like that. Let's go ahead and take off our landing lights here. Looks pretty good to me. Whoop, pull that all the way off. And make sure you're paying attention to when you're driving on the ground there. You don't want to go off into the grass. So that's it as far as the default built-in Airbus goes for you Xbox folks. Very, very solid airplane. I think you'll find it very, very easy to use. The big thing that you got to remember is it's a little, what I want to call it, the fly-by-wire is a little different. It's going to take you a little while to get the hang of that, so kind of be mindful. Now, the emergency procedures on this aircraft are real gas. One thing you can do, by the way, after you come down on the ground, it's not a bad idea to fire up the APU, because most likely you're going to be doing a turnaround with this airplane anyway, so you're going to have to be able to get the pressure up and get the air conditioning on and everything like that. But other than that, enjoy.